Hi, this is Kogito, and welcome to another Through the Ages video. So in the last video, we saw my first game in my 2026 World Championship run, and in that game I managed to finish first, so that's obviously a great start, but there's gonna be 8 games total in this group, so winning one game only gets you so far. In this video, we'll see the second 4-player game in this group. If I can also finish first in that game, we'll be in a very strong position to finish first. But if I finish second or lesser than that, then the group will be very much up for grabs. It'll be up for grabs no matter what, but obviously it'll be a huge help if I finish first. So without further ado, let's take a look. In this game, I'm playing third. We can take a quick look at the leaders and wonders. What stands out to me most about this deck is there's a relative lack of synergies, kind of for all the ages. But you can see in age 3, the 2 major point wonders, Hollywood and Spaceflight, aren't here. There's internet, but there aren't really that strong internet synergy leaders like Pierre or Sid Meier. Most of the wonders are kind of more, useful for any sort of civilization. The leaders, too, there aren't, there's Fleming and Chaplin, but again, not much payoff for them. There's not really any lab leaders except for Steve Jobs. So overall, there's not really any strategy in particular that calls out. Similarly, in Age 2, there's Ocean Liner Service, but not Maria. There's no Suez Canal. Again, Harvard College, but no space flight. So, there's a few like Harvard College Manhattan Project, something like that maybe. But overall, I would say this is more a game that's not really about targeting synergies, but more just building a strong, overall civilization to take advantage of whatever comes at you. One thing I'll note about the Age 1 leaders is most of them do like to be elected early, with the exception of Gutenberg. And the Age 1 wonders are pretty good overall. I mean, not fantastic, and a much Pichu and St. Peter's Basilica are some of the less power wonders, but still not bad if you have, not terrible if you have to give up an Age A wonder. So, to get started, Cleveland takes Engineering Genius. I think that's very defensible. Fat Hope takes Colosseum and Aristotle. I think in this card row, there aren't that many cards that are that much obviously better than the others. Colosseum and Aristotle, I think, aren't the best leader and wonder, but they're both pretty good. Especially Colosseum is pretty good in 4-player game, I think. So getting a leader and a wonder for guaranteed isn't too bad. Even though you could argue Boudica's probably better than Aristotle, but Aristotle plus a wonder may be better. So I can understand this pick. As for me, though, so again, because there isn't that much specifically calling for me, I had a bit of a tough time, but I ended up going with Boudica and the patriotism. I think the Boudica is the strongest card, kind of in a vacuum among all these, maybe tied with Roman roads, but with Boudica, I can get a patriotism, which definitely isn't the strongest Age A yellow card. In fact, it's arguably the weakest, but it's better than nothing. And I think it especially pairs pretty nicely with Boudica, because if you get the military rocks with Boudica, then the patriotism helps you out a little bit more with that. Lets you build like a swordsman or a knights for free, for example. So, but again, Boudica maybe tied with Roman roads, but there's also some strong ones, particularly the pyramids could come out of the deck, and maybe I'll get Roman roads anyway. I could also get Colossus, which especially in a 4-player game is pretty good, even without Suez Canal. So I just decided to go with, like I said, I think especially if you look at all the AJ leaders in the deck, Boudica is probably the best. I mean, Sun Tzu can potentially have a high ceiling, but he doesn't have great synergy in Age 1. There's no Ziska or Genghis Khan, who I think are the strongest synergy. There's no Ziska, Genghis Khan, or Barbarossa, who I think are the 3 military leaders, right? Aside from Jean of Arc, maybe. But they're definitely the 3 leaders that synergize most with them. So for that reason, I think Boudica is just a tier above the other AJ leaders in this deck, whereas Roman roads is sort of, tied or a bit worse than pyramids. So that's why I went with Boudica. So someone takes Cleopatra and Colossus. I think overall, like I said, the cards here are kind of all good enough that I don't particularly object to any combination of cards that someone might take. I do think Cleopatra has some pretty bad synergy with Colossus, though, because it's only a 2-stage wonder, and you want more stages of a wonder for Cleo's bonus to work on. So I think maybe Moses plus Roman roads would have been better. I think Moses pairs pretty nicely with Roman roads, makes him better than he usually is, so I probably would have gone with that if I was Asmer. Maybe Sun Tzu. Anyway, Age 1 begins. Cleveland does take Sun Tzu. I think that's totally justifiable. And takes Roman roads. I think taking Roman roads is definitely right here for one less civil action than pyramids. What I do disagree with is Cleveland building a stage of the Roman roads instead of building a mine. I feel that building the mine is definitely strongly preferable here. It would still let Cleveland finish Roman roads next turn potentially with the engineering genius. Pat Hope elects Aristotle, already has a wonder, so after putting in the mine and increasing their population, Pat Hope takes an urban growth. That's a very sensible line in my opinion, but it does mean that I get pyramids for one civil action, which is definitely fortunate for me. Build a mine, increase my population, and elect Boudica. Pretty standard turn for me, but I get, in my opinion, the best leader and arguably the best wonder out of all my opponents, so this is definitely quite a good start for me, though Cleveland got the engineering genius and Fat Hope got the urban growth, which are better yellow cards than the patriotism, so that somewhat balances it out. I draw 2 tactics. Sazmer elects Cleo, builds a mine, increases the population, and takes an urban growth. Unfortunately, Sazmer doesn't use Cleo's rock bonus this turn, instead takes the urban growth to potentially use it next turn. Not using Cleo's bonus is never somewhere you want to be. This is one of the weaknesses of taking Cleo with Colossus, definitely. It's not the end of the world, though. Cleveland Seeds reveals development of trade routes. Cleveland finishes Roman roads and increases the population. Again, I think Cleveland could have easily... Maybe Cleveland is probably leaving population open for potential development of religion or warfare. So I understand that logic, but Cleveland at this point has sacrificed 2 rocks to not build a mine. So getting development of warfare would only save the military action and not any rocks, even if it is revealed. Same with... and getting the development of religion would only save 1 rock, so not building a mine just to leave population open is kinda not worth it in almost every situation, I think. Fat Hope Seeds reveals development of science. Builds a second lab, increases the population, builds one stage of Colosseum, and takes the reserves. I understand the logic here of, pretty efficient play, only taking a card for 1 civil action, but I think reserves is an inefficient yellow card to take, which kind of defeats the purpose of these civil action efficient plays. So I think maybe either the Frugality or possibly taking Irrigation on Nostradamus might have been better. In my case, obviously I can't seed, so here, this was a little bit of a complicated turn for me. There's not that obvious thing to do. I think the first thing to decide is whether I want to build a second lab or whether I want to build a stage of the pyramids. And I ended up going with the pyramids, as you can see, for a couple reasons. First of all, as we'll see, I'm planning on spending 3 civil actions to take cards, meaning if I built the lab, I wouldn't be able to increase my population. I also, don't want to increase my population on turn 3 if I don't have to avoid going into consumption early. Especially with Boudica, having extra population is pretty important in case you need to use her military resources. So that's one reason to leave a free population open in case of development of warfare or religion. The second reason, prioritizing pyramids over lab is, I think, justified. I'm probably spending 2 science in order to get a civil action a turn earlier. So basically 1 civil action for 2 science, which I think is a relatively even deal, especially with Boudica giving me extra science. Makes it a lot easier to delay the second lab. So that's why I went this way. And I decided to take the Irrigation and Nostradamus. I wasn't too... the urban growth would have been fine, but I thought that I wasn't too excited about that. The Irrigation, I thought, it's... Getting an Irrigation this early, I think, is pretty good. This is also a pretty good game with Irrigation. There's Machu Picchu, Statue of Liberty, and Ocean Liner Service all synergized with it fairly well. So I thought not only is getting an early Irrigation always nice, but in this deck in particular, it's nice. Barbarossa would make it, decidedly really good. But even without Barbarossa, I think there's sufficient synergy to make it better than it usually is, and an early Irrigation is always pretty good. Nostradamus is just a strong leader, obviously, and getting a strong leader for 1 civil action, even this early, even though I'm definitely going to wait to elect him to get more value out of Boudica, just having him in hand is nice, and again, I wasn't too excited. I mean, both of these yellow cards would have been fine, but I think getting a strong leader guaranteed for 1 civil action is better. I draw an aggression and tactics, so still no events to seed. Sazma, on the other hand, does seed and reveals that development of warfare. Sazma spends the clear resources to build a stage of the Colossus, increases the population, can't build a lab this turn even if they wanted to because they took development of warfare. So instead, Sazma just takes a breakthrough and an urban growth. having 2 urban growths in your hand, I mean, it's not terrible, but it'll take a while before they become useful. So I think maybe, especially since Sazmer went into consumption early, taking that frugality instead of this urban growth might have been better. Cleveland Seeds reveals the development of markets. Cleveland takes a knight, plays it, and builds 2 knights. So as we can see, Cleveland is, I guess you could say, taking advantage of not having built this early minor lab by instead putting that population into the military. So Cleveland, with Sun Tzu, is pushing military very strongly, building these 2 knights directly is definitely a suggestion. There's a heavy cavalry tactic in here, so that could definitely be quite scary quite soon, as in next turn. So that's something all of us need to be prepared for. Fat Hope finishes Colosseum, plays a fighting band tactic to at least be protected from Cleveland this turn, and takes a swordsman, obviously good with the fighting band, and Michelangelo. Michelangelo, you know, has some synergy with Colosseum, obviously, giving it extra culture. A little risky to take Michelangelo before knowing that you'll be able to be on iron. Michelangelo really needs iron, I think, to be good. But this is the first copy of Iron on the row. No one has taken it, so there's still a pretty good chance that Fat Hope will be able to get irons eventually. Joan of Arc less helpful for Fat Hope because they already have their 3rd military action, so I can definitely understand Michelangelo here. As for me, I take Development of Warfare. I also, as you can see, I take the food with it as well because after Cleveland and Fat Hope built their military, I'm getting military resources from Boudica, and in order to spend those military resources, I need to, after taking Development of Warfare, increase my population 2 times to have a happy worker. So I needed to take the food to do that. Essentially, taking this food also got me 2 rocks because I'm getting 2 extra rocks from Boudica. So I definitely wanted to spend those, and thankfully, this also completes my legion tactics, so I am also protected from Cleveland, at least for this turn. And I can spend my remaining rocks finishing this pyramid, so I still have an efficient use for these rocks, even though I still have to delay my 2nd lab. And on my final civil action, taking this iron for 1 civil action definitely seemed right. I could have taken the alchemy too, but especially with irrigation, I wanted to leave myself open to Machu Picchu, and iron in general is just a, you know, probably a better tech than alchemy, I would say, you know, absent, you know, serious considerations. And while Watt does make alchemy better because it can put you on coal, we also have Newton to make scientific method better, so that balances out. I discard one of my redundant tactics. Sazmer finishes Colossus, takes Imagi Castle, so that Sazmer can continue spending clear resources for a little bit longer. Builds a temple. This, I think building a temple when Development of Religion could still potentially be in the deck is definitely a mistake. So I do criticize Sazmer for that play. Cleveland takes the 2nd copy of Iron now, as well as building a 3rd knight, takes the monarchy, increases the population to get out of Uprising, and expectedly plays the heavy cavalry tactic. So even though Cleveland has delayed the economy significantly, Cleveland is at least getting a serious advantage out of that by putting those workers that would have been in the economy into this heavy cavalry tactic, thus putting severe pressure on their opponents. So even though I think this is generally not what you want to do, Cleveland is at least taking advantage, like I said, making it work for them. So I think this ended up being a defensible line of play from Cleveland, I think. The Roman roads is also compensating for the loss of the mine income a little bit. What I'm not sure about is taking these 2 techs with Cleveland having such low science income. Sure, the monarchy maybe can get a revolution soon, but I still maybe the rich land to pair with the iron would have been better than having 2 techs in your hand with such low science. That being said, though, we now have to respond to Cleveland's strength push, and it'll probably be very hard for the rest of us. Fat Hope's season indeed does reveal that the Development of Religion was in the deck. Fat Hope is not able to take advantage of this. Instead, they take the breakthrough and the cartography while building a swordsman and upgrading a swordsman. So, if Fat Hope has 3 bonus cards, they're able to defend against an aggression. Of course, that seems pretty unlikely. The cartography makes sense, you know, Aristotle wants you to take a text, so this turn makes sense to me from Fat Hope. It's my turn. I still can't seed. I am able to use the development of religion, though. I have enough food to increase my population again, thankfully, which lets me build another free warrior with my Boudica income. So I think that's a pretty natural way to play this turn. The question is what else I want to do. And I think there are definitely a few options here. One thing that I do decide to do, first of all, is elect Nostradamus. I think I pretty much have to do this because being on 6 strength with only 2 military actions is just inviting Cleveland to get a free aggression on me. And with Sun Tzu, chances are pretty good that Cleveland has an aggression in hand. Now, of course, I don't have any bonus cards in my hand, so Cleveland could still get a successful aggression out of me potentially. But I felt that with Fat Hope needing 3 bonus cards to defend, and me only needing 1 bonus card to defend, even though Fat Hope has drawn more cards than me, I figured that if Cleveland wanted to try an aggression, they would likely target Fat Hope, or potentially Sazmer, who also will struggle to defend, rather than me. So I thought that the chances of Cleveland targeting me with an aggression seemed quite low. I want to take the Machu Picchu, maybe not the best wonder, but I obviously have the text for it, and I think when you have the 2 texts for Machu Picchu, it is a good wonder. I think the weakness of Machu Picchu is more that it's inconsistent, because you really want both of these. So I think that this, all these actions so far, I think are pretty natural. The question is what to do with my remaining civil actions. I could maybe take some cards, but I decided, I think, yeah, to just upgrade an iron. I have the science for it, so instead of taking yellow cards, I think it's just much more civil action efficient to work on your civilization instead. The question was more, do I want to prioritize irrigation or iron upgrades? And there's definitely a case to be made for prioritizing irrigation, because I really want to get 1 more population before the Asians to either, you know, exist to avoid uprising, or maybe to put in my military, or, you know, finally to build a second lab, probably more likely. However, I think with Machu Picchu especially, it makes a lot more sense to start with iron upgrades. Machu Picchu costs a lot of rocks for an Age 1 wonder, so I think delaying the mine upgrades too long just makes it too hard to finish Machu Picchu in a reasonable amount of time. I unfortunately don't draw a bonus card, instead I draw redundant heavy cavalry. Sazmer sees revealing development of agriculture, which is good for me, as we'll see. The event deck now flips. Sazmer builds 1 stage of the Himeji Castle with the Cleopatra bonus, and builds a 3rd warrior, as well as taking this engineering genius for 2 civil actions, but this will allow Sazmer, Sazmer could have still finished the Himeji Castle next turn with the Cleo bonus, but this allows Sazmer to finish it while also doing other things, and, you know, these cards here don't seem that useful for Sazmer, so I agree with this play. Cleveland could have definitely gotten an aggression against probably any of us, but it looks like Cleveland probably doesn't have one because they seeded instead. So I was happy to see that. He reveals new deposits, which is a bit better for me than for my opponents. Cleveland takes Saladin, good leader. Elects him now, makes sense to me. Get upgrades the heavy cavalry that probably no one else will be able to use. Cleveland increased the population twice. He's one to build another knight, so Cleveland is really pushing military this game. I think this 4th knight may be a little excessive. Cleveland had 7 resources. These workers, maybe these workers wanted to be in the economy and not another knight that doesn't fulfill the tactic. I'm not sure if there's a huge difference between 12 and 14. I mean, it does put more pressure on all of us, right? It means that Fat Hope means that all of us will struggle much more to defend against possible aggressions. But of course, now that Cleveland is on Saladin and not Sun Tzu, it'll be a little harder for Cleveland to draw aggressions with only 2 military actions. And drawing 1 less card now from building the knights. So I understand this putting pressure on the opponents. Maybe it would have been better to save it for the economy. Although, actually, no, looking at it again, Cleveland had to do this to get out of corruption. So never mind everything that I just said. I apologize to Cleveland. Feta does not seed. Instead, they play the cartography, take Code of Laws, and play that too. Elect Michelangelo, and Michelangelo enables them to take the Silk Road. So I think electing Michelangelo now to take the Silk Road is definitely right. However, the cost of this play is that even after putting the warrior and changing to my Legion tactic to get an extra strength, which does cost 2 draws, but +1 strength, so I think that's justifiable. Fat Hope is in Corruption. Fat Hope this turn could have avoided Corruption by increasing the population, and building a 4th Swordsman. That would have meant, and maybe putting the Swordsman and not upgrading, and then copying the tactic, for example. So, I think that basically Fat Hope accepted Corruption in order to play Cartography this turn. And presumably Fat Hope knows that colonies are coming, so I can understand wanting the bonus for the colonies. However, in general, I feel that Corruption, you know, sometimes taking Corruption is right if, like, you really, really need to do other things. But I feel that maybe playing the Cartography this turn is not worth eating Corruption. Or possibly, you know, taking the Code of Laws. There's another copy on the road coming, so Fat Hope probably could have gotten a Code of Laws. I mean, I'm not really in a position to take Code of Laws. Sazmer, not really, only being in 1 science income. Cleveland is also only in 1 science income. So I feel like most of the rest of us really aren't in a position to take Code of Laws. So almost certainly at least one of these copies would have been available to Fat Hope next turn. So I think even if Fat Hope did want to play Cartography this turn, which I can understand again if there's colonies here, I think maybe not taking Code of Laws and instead, like I said, increasing the population and building a Swordsman to get out of Corruption would have been better. Anyways, for my turn, I still don't have any cards to siege, but I am able to get a Swordsman for 1 civil action. This is a really vital card for me to be able to compete in strength with everyone, especially Cleveland, so I definitely wanted to take it. So after playing it, I also decided to use a free population. I could have put this into the military, but instead I decided to build a lab. After playing Swordsman, I am at exactly 0 science, and I felt just existing for too much longer and only 1 science income would set my science back way too much. I obviously want to play irrigation relatively soon and want to save up science, especially for an H2 government and stuff like that. The risk of this, of course, is that even after upgrading to Swordsman, I still am at risk of an aggression from Cleveland, because I don't have any bonus cards. But again, I think, you know, bluffing 1 bonus card, usually works pretty well. Sometimes people call your bluff. Maybe I bluff too much. I think maybe stronger opponents call the bluff more often. But I think especially in this scenario where, again, Fat Hope would need 2 bonus cards in order to defend against Cleveland. Admittedly, Fat Hope has drawn more cards than I have, but Sazmer's gonna finish Himeji Castle, so Sazmer will probably be able to defend. But I still felt that with Fat Hope needing 2 bonus cards to defend, there's still a good chance that even if Cleveland had an aggression, which is never guaranteed, especially since Cleveland only drew 1 card last turn, that there's a good chance that Cleveland would aggress against Fat Hope and not me. So that's why I was comfortable taking the risk and putting the lab instead of putting a population into my military and then, like, existing on 1 science income for who knows how much longer. With my last civil action, I decided to upgrade a mine. Again, I think in general, it's better to do this when you can instead of taking a yellow card. To be civil action efficient, Sazmer Seeds does reveal territories, so Fat Hope, playing the Cartography last turn, definitely more understandable. Unfortunately, Sazmer was able to win this territory. I think me bidding 2 here was a mistake, though, because that's sort of a tell that I don't have any bonus cards, you know. So I think that I should have passed instead of bidding 2. There was no reason to, especially since a 2 bid, there's no way I could have possibly won with Fat Hope and Sazmer both having colonization bonuses. So that was definitely a mistake on my end. Anyway, Sazmer is able to win the strategic territory. It cost them 2 warriors, though. This is a pretty significant cost to pay, I will say. But because Sazmer is able to finish Himeji Castle and rebuild the warrior, Sazmer is at 8 strength, and with Himeji Castle, Sazmer could get up to 12 by sacrificing a warrior, meaning that they would still be able to defend an aggression against Cleveland. That being said, if they sacrificed a warrior, they wouldn't be able to... They would be able to get it back next turn because they would only be able to pop for 2. So this play does make sense from Cleveland. Plays a medieval army preemptively to keep these cards in their hand. Cleveland decides to go for the revolution this turn. Does suffer corruption. I think, you know, doing a revolution for corruption isn't great. However, that being said, we can see that there's literally only tech cards in the row, and Cleveland definitely doesn't want to take tech cards right now with their science situation. So I think actually here, taking corruption to do a revolution makes a lot of sense, because otherwise they would have had a fair amount of civil actions and not really anything to do with them. Fat Hope Sees reveals a scientific breakthrough that helps me and Fat Hope a bit more than the other two players, so I'm rewarded a little bit for building that lab last turn. Fat Hope decides to spend their turn finishing the Silk Road. They could have definitely taken some text or something. I think especially, you know, alchemy may have been good for them. The weakness of doing this is that it risks going into Age 2 without having any buildings to upgrade, which can definitely cause some issues. Occasionally it works out, but I think most of the time it causes issues. That being said, finishing the Silk Road immediately has a lot of benefits as well, so I'm not... Especially with Michelangelo, meaning Fat Hope can potentially take Forbidden City next turn, for example. So I think this is a very defensible play. It's my turn, I still can't see. I am at least able to make use of that patriotism. And then I spend my remaining civil actions. Well, I do have to take the theology, because next turn, the only way I'll be able to get out of Uprising is to upgrade a theology. I could, this turn, upgrade a farm instead to, let's see, would that help? No, even upgrading a farm instead to let me pop next turn would not get me out of Uprising, as we can see. So I absolutely need to take the theology this turn no matter what. So the question is just whether to, what else to do. And I decided to do it this way. And as we can see, I thought for a while about, do I want to focus on farms first, upgrade both farms first, so I can pop next turn, although the population next turn would be unhappy anyway, so I think there's not a strong reason to upgrade this farm too. But I did think about, do I want to upgrade this warrior to a swordsman as well? Just doing it like this, though, is enough for me to defend no matter what, as we can see. There's a specific reason I didn't and just left it here. So as we can see, in the current state of affairs, next turn I'll have 7 rocks. So next turn, let's say I upgrade, I will need to spend 2 rocks to upgrade a theology, and then I'll also want to spend 2 rocks to upgrade this farm. So that'll be 4 rocks, and that'll put me at 3, plus 6 will be 9 rocks in 2 turns, which will be just enough to finish Machu Picchu. So basically, if I upgraded this swordsman this turn, then 2 turns from now, I would likely be 1 rock short of finishing Machu Picchu. Whereas keeping it like this means that I will be able to finish Machu Picchu in 2 turns. And for that reason, I decided to keep this unit as a warrior. Sometimes it's really important to plan multiple turns ahead like this. That was a little maybe obvious to say. Whatever. I finally draw an event to siege with Nostradamus, develop territory. I mean, you know, ceding a territory against 2 players with colonization bonuses and 1 player with 3 military actions is generally not what you want to do. But at the very least, I can hope that my opponents will fight a lot over this colony and have to sacrifice a fair amount to it, which will at least make it so that it might be about even for them to get the benefits of the colony but lose the units to it. And I also draw a naval trade agreement. Sazmar Seeds, despite being weakest, reveals a cultural influence, which helps Sazmar and Fat Hope the most. Sazmar decides to take Gutenberg. I do think this is a game where Gutenberg can be very useful. As you can see, Sazmar is electing them at the end of the age, and there's a copy of Alchemy right here for the taking. So I think Gutenberg is quite good in this situation. However, yeah, where I do disagree with Sazmar is that instead of just taking the Alchemy, they decide to right, they don't use the Gutenberg action to take the Alchemy. They use the Gutenberg action to play the Alchemy, and then disbands a warrior to build a lab directly. And while I understand that this does give them, obviously, +2 science protection immediately, I think that it costs you a lot of the value of Gutenberg. Obviously, the reason Gutenberg is very, very good in certain situations is that you effectively get 1 extra civil action a turn and the additional benefits of, you know, saving a science or saving a rock and getting additional culture. Just using the Gutenberg action this one time means that it will be a lot more difficult for Sazmar to get full value out of Gutenberg in the future. I think that full value, especially the civil action saved, would be more important than getting the science production going quicker. Sazmar, for example, instead could have maybe played the Knights, or maybe taken another useful card here of some sort. like the Code of Laws, for example, might be good for Sazmer. So I didn't like that play. Cleveland Seeds reveals a wealthy territory. Again, I think I made a mistake here, bidding 2, kind of tell that I don't have any bonus cards. I should have just passed here. Colony bidding in general is something I definitely need to work on. Anyway, Cleveland ends up winning this colony for only 1 warrior and 3 bonus cards, so that's definitely good for Cleveland. Cleveland decides to take the St. Peter's Basilica. I think this is a defensible choice. I think for Cleveland, the Forbidden City is definitely better than the St. Peter's Basilica because it gives Cleveland, at this point, the same amount of happy faces, essentially, right? The St. Peter's Basilica would give Cleveland 2. The Forbidden City would basically also give Cleveland 2. However, it would give Cleveland an extra civil action, which is worth a lot. That being said, as we can see, Fat Hope could easily... The Forbidden City will be discarded before Fat Hope's turn, but the St. Peter's Basilica would be available. St. Peter's Basilica does pair quite nicely with Michelangelo. So this is not just, you know, pretty good for Cleveland as a way to spend these excess rocks, but it's also a denial to Fat Hope. So for that reason, I think this is actually justifiable. And Cleveland decides to just finish it. I think that is reasonable. At this point, there's not really much point to building this mine directly. Building this Age-A mine. Next turn, Cleveland will be able to build an Age-1 mine directly, which I think will be better. So I agree with doing this. And like I said, I think you can debate whether doing Forbidden City or St. Peter's Basilica would be better here, because this is better for Cleveland, but this is a denial to Fat Hope. So, and I think... Oh yeah, I should mention, even though, obviously as Nostradamus, I know what people are seeding, I neglected to note down the cards that people were seeding while the game was going on. So that's something I'm going to need to do in the future if I ever take Nostradamus, so I do apologize for that. But that means that, you know, I won't actually know for sure during this recording. But my point is that, you know, perhaps another reason Cleveland picked St. Peter's Basilica is because Cleveland seeded immigration. Fat Hope Seeds reveals border conflict. I am able to avoid that, thankfully. Fat Hope increases the population and decides to take knights and iron, so Cleveland is able to get iron with Michelangelo. Also takes a Brennan Circuses to fix the happy face situation. Maybe this wasn't necessarily needed, but, you know, it can avoid a rebellion too, for example, so I think that makes sense. Cleveland also maybe doesn't have... Well, Cleveland could have upgraded an iron this turn, but I think instead they're going to build a knight to compete in strength more. So for that reason, they didn't really have anything better to do with the civil action than take the Brennan Circuses anyway. H2 begins. I see the colony, for reasons already stated, reveal Crusades, which also doesn't hit me at least. I go with the plan that I already had, which was to upgrade the theology and the irrigation. Because I am Nostradamus, I believe that I did have full knowledge of this event deck, at least, so I knew that there weren't any rats in this event deck, so there's no reason for me not to do this. Yeah. And to be civil action efficient, I didn't really, you know, the cavalrymen definitely would have been nice to take, but for 3 civil actions, when I have these other useful things to do with my civil actions, namely upgrade the irrigation, it didn't seem great. So instead, and none of these cards for 2 civil actions seemed great, so I decided to spend 1 civil action to build a Siege of Machu Picchu. So the question was just to do with my last civil action, and taking the alchemy was definitely an option here. I think when you have Machu Picchu, being on irrigation, iron, and alchemy can definitely be quite fine. But I felt that, you know, next turn I want to finish Machu Picchu, so even if I took alchemy, it would be 2 turns before I started upgrading them. That would be kind of late. Maybe I could hope to get Harvard College, but you can never guarantee that in a 4-player game. And especially since there's Newton in the deck, I felt that it was just... It generally seemed better for me to wait for a scientific method instead of taking alchemy here. So, because of that, I decided to take the Warfare instead, which, you know, it will also maybe be a while before I can play a Warfare realistically, but if I do, you know, it can obviously help me compete in strength, with this being more of a strength-focused game, and also give me an extra military action for some draws, which, especially in H2, are pretty important, especially with Nostradamus. So that's why I went with the Warfare here. I drew no suitable event, sadly. Sazmer increased the population. decides to destroy a lab for to the border conflict, which makes sense with Gutenberg. Builds a knight to now compete in strength with the medieval army Wait, is it medieval army? Yeah, with the medieval army tactic finally going. Let's see. Builds a lab. Builds an Age A lab. With the Gutenberg action and the urban growth. This is actually, yeah, this is leaving one rock on the table though to do this. Sazmer, let's see, could have, yeah, Sazmer had just enough to build an Age 1 lab directly with the Gutenberg action. So doing this does, though, let Sazmer use the Gutenberg action again next turn. So in that sense, by doing this, Sazmer is kind of not costing a rock and is giving themselves 2 culture, but on the other hand, they're getting 1 less science. So I think it still would have been better for Sazmer to build an Age 1 lab directly this turn. Anyway, Sazmer also takes the irrigation and plays it preemptively. Irrigation, like I said, is pretty good in this game. Even a late irrigation is not awful in this game, so I think that's defensible. Oh, and at this point, now that everyone's taken a turn after Age 1, after Age 2 began, we can take a quick look at how people are doing. So culture-wise, my opponents are all doing a bit better than me. You know, they have about 10 more culture than I do and 2 more culture production than I do. So I'm gonna probably be falling behind in culture this game, especially since I won't be able to seed with Nostradamus next turn. Science-wise, this has been a low science game thus far, but we're slowly all recovering from that and doing pretty evenly on that score. Resources-wise, though, I am doing better than my opponents, and will be doing even better than that soon when I finish Machu Picchu. So the resources are definitely my major advantage, as well as the food, too, soon, obviously. Civil actions, Cleveland is currently doing best with the monarchy going and Saladin. Overall, right now, it seems like a pretty even game. I think Cleveland, despite neglecting their economy for a while, kind of, you know, offset that by having such a strong strength push. So I think that strategy actually worked out pretty well for Cleveland. So I think Cleveland now needs to maintain the strength advantage, get more value out of it while building up their economy. Fat Hope has not built up their economy yet. That's their biggest issue. But they do have Michelangelo with iron potentially. They're going to need to fix Uprising, unfortunately, there, but they can do that with reserves. And they have the Silk Road, too. So Fat Hope is definitely set up pretty nicely if they can get an H2 government soon. Sazmer also really desperately needs an H2 government, but they have the Alchemist going, 2 Strength Wonders, so out of everyone except Cleveland, they're most set up to compete for strength right now. My major advantage, like I said, is my rock income. Anyway, Cleveland reveals the vast territory. This time I was smart enough to pass instead of trying to bet. Fat Hope is able to win it for just 1 swordsman, which is really good for Fat Hope. So that's going to definitely make Fat Hope's position a lot better. Finally getting value out of that cartography. Cleveland increased the population, decides to build a 3rd farm while putting in mind directly. This 3rd farm, I'm not convinced by. It's not going to give any value until 3 turns from now, as we can see. Unless there's maybe a good harvest on the deck, but even then I feel that this population would be much better served going into a lab instead. Or maybe just not building this and saving the population for, say, a journalism in the future, if they can manage that. The reserves, though, I guess, you know, the reserves maybe will make this food a little more helpful, at least. Fat Hope increases the population, takes an engineering genius, builds a 2nd Knights, and then plays this, and then copies the medieval army tactic. So Fat Hope has copied 2 tactics, so giving up some military card draws, but by doing this, they are able to match Cleveland in strength, so that is definitely nice. Winning the vast territory also immediately fixed Fat Hope's uprising issue, so that was definitely nice. They also preemptively play the iron and increase the population. Engineering genius, taking for 2 civil actions, I can see, you know, Cleveland already has the knight, so no need for this. It is probably the best card. Maybe the efficient upgrade could also be considered, because it can be used for the mine directly next turn, though. So the efficient upgrade could let Fat Hope upgrade their mines twice, or even 3 times with the reserves. So maybe the efficient upgrade would have been better right now. because it could be used earlier. It was my turn. I can't see it. I decided to try offering the naval trade agreement to maybe try to compete with my opponents in colonization a bit more. So I tried offering it to Cleveland because Cleveland is the only player, my only opponent without a colonization bonus. But it did get rejected. Maybe in retrospect, I should have accepted that I really have no chance of winning a colony anytime soon, and instead taking the 2 blue tokens. I probably should have done that, frankly. That was a mistake on my end. Anyway, though, I see no reason not to just finish Machu Picchu this turn, because I can still take the card that I really want on the row, or the 2 cards I really want on the row, namely Robespierre and Cavalryman. Cavalryman, obviously, you know, letting me use cavalry tactics, and Robespierre, I think, is the best H2 leader, even outside of this particular deck, much less inside this deck for me. When I'm on such low science and I need an H2 government, there's really no one better than Robespierre. I think no one else even comes particularly close, frankly, in this type of situation. So I was definitely really fortunate to be able to just take Robespierre right now. I would have taken him for 3 civil actions, frankly. Anyway, I decided to go ahead and discard my H1 cards. And I drew another aggression and a national pride, a suitable event at least, even though I won't win it. I will at least get 5 culture out of seeding it, so it's kind of like I'll get 5 culture, whoever will win it will get 5 culture, so it'll put me and that other person 5 culture ahead of the other 2 opponents. Anyway, Sazmer is able to use the Gutenberg action to take a journalism. Maybe, you know, this doesn't mean that Sazmer can't use the Gutenberg action this turn to upgrade a lab, but the journalism, it might be a little difficult for Sazmer to get going, but on the other hand, you know, with these 2 strength wonders, one of them being Himechi Castle, Sazmer is pretty well protected right now, even though they are weakest. So that perhaps gives Sazmer more leeway to maybe push culture. It looks like by taking journalism and drama, Sazmer is probably aiming for a Shakespeare game. So that's something that the rest of us will have to be careful about. Takes an efficient upgrade while upgrading the farms. This would definitely be highly useful for coals later down the line. So, given that Sazmer is clearly aiming for a Shakespeare game, I think this play makes sense. Cleveland sees reveals immigration. Probably, I think, almost certainly seeded by Cleveland. Of course, during the game, I knew that for sure. But anyway, this definitely, like I said, makes St. Peter's Basilica make more sense. Cleveland finishes upgrading their mines, takes a selective breeding. This is definitely going to be very useful for Cleveland, and uses that free immigration population to build a lab. Maybe this is why Cleveland decided to build that farm, because they knew they would get another free population from immigration soon enough anyway. So they're at least able to get this lab going now, and indeed this lab will give them just enough science to play selective breeding next turn. So this was definitely a really good turn for Cleveland, and also takes the breakthrough to help their science even more. Fat Hope Seeds reveals a good harvest. Maybe this was, like I said, I think this is probably also a reason why Cleveland, notably Cleveland takes strength from Saladin instead of the civil action. So, in my opinion, taking strength just to become strongest is usually not worth it. I think taking strength is worth it when it either moves you from weakest to strongest, or when it protects you from aggressions potentially. But that's just my opinion. I'm not kind of convinced on exactly when to take strength in Saladin. I think it's kind of an underexplored subject, frankly. Anyway, Fat Hope takes a breakthrough of their own and a revolutionary idea. I think because Fat Hope, obviously taking yellow cards with the Silk Road is nice, and Fat Hope, like me and Sazmer, really needs that H2 government, so I think this is sensible. However, instead of upgrading a mine, they choose to build a knights and switch to the heavy cavalry. This doesn't make Fat Hope stronger, but I wonder if it's worth it to delay the mine upgrades more, and also to lose 2 card draws. I think that those are both really significant costs to this line. Fat Hope has cost themselves 6 draws by copying tactics 3 times, which at that point is getting that's a lot of draws to miss, I think. Anyway, like for reasons I said, like I seeded, And after the tier 2 gets revealed again, I decided to be smart and not try bidding on this one. Phantom ends up winning it. At least it cost them a fair amount of resources to do so. So this turn was difficult for me because I had to decide whether or not to do a Robespierre Revolution. And the reason is, well, as you can tell, if I do the revolution, I will only have 9 strength. So I will be vulnerable to an aggression from Cleveman. And Cleveman has drawn a fair number of H2 cards at this point, so the chances of them having an aggression are pretty reasonable. And I thought for a long time about how exactly I wanted to do this turn. I considered maybe playing the Warfare instead this turn, or, you know, maybe doing some other things. I mean, none of these cards are particularly are that attractive, I think. Maybe the Urban Growth for later. At the end of the day, I decided to do this, though. I think one reason, like I said, is, as you can see, I don't really have that much else to do on my turn. I can't really, you know, I have these resources to spend and not really that much to do with them. I could have, you know, put stuff into my swordsman or something, but none of these other cards in the row I really want. I mean, I could just take the Republic and not do the Revolution yet. Just take it, you know, make sure my opponents can't get it. But I decided, you know, if I'm taking it anyway, it kind of feels like a waste not to just do the Robespierre Revolution right now. I just get so much of a benefit from doing it a turn earlier. 3 extra solo actions from doing it a turn earlier. And at the end of the day, I figured, first of all, the way that Cleveland has been playing this game, we can see they are not risking aggressions specifically. There have been multiple turns where Cleveland, if they had an aggression, could have very likely used it against an opponent, and they haven't. They haven't played a single aggression this game. And second of all, being at 9 strength is technically just enough such that if one of these were a bonus card, that would be enough for me to defend. The final reason why I decided to do this play is because of, I felt, because I have so many rocks to work with Machu Picchu and stuff, I thought that the only aggression that would be really bad for me would be the spy. Like, I have an infiltrate and a raid, but, like, the second, I actually think I might have drawn 2 raids this game. Maybe only 1, but the second copy of either of these, you know, infiltrate against Robespierre would be annoying, but manageable. A second raid would be annoying, but manageable. Plunder would be annoying, but manageable. Basically, anything I thought would be manageable except a spy. A spy would be really, really bad for me. So, basically, like, doing it this way would kind of lose me the game if Cleveland had a spy and chose to use it. But I figured that the benefit of doing the revolution a turn earlier was so great, and like I also like can't necessarily guarantee that next turn would be any better. I mean, maybe it would if I increase my military this turn, but you can't know for sure. And like I said, also just that I didn't feel that I had great alternatives. I mean, aside from that, you know, I'm getting out of corruption by building a temple, and then I can also take this wave of nationalism with the extra civil actions I get from the Robespierre Revolution. So, yeah. Even looking back here, I'm not convinced by this play. It's definitely a highly risky play, and I'm probably not in a position where I really need to take such a play. I mean, if Cleveland did use a spy, spoilers, they don't. But if Cleveland did hit me with a spy after this, I would, like, almost certainly lose the game on the spot, I feel, looking back at this. So, I think in retrospect, this was too much of a risk on my end. And keeping Nostradamus for at least an extra turn and, you know, maybe taking the Republic to make sure I had it, and then increasing my population 2 times and, like, building a swordsman or something would have been better. Probably. It's kind of a philosophical question, I think, but yeah, looking back, it was too risky. And anyway, Sazimir Seeds reveals uncertain borders. So obviously, I knew this was on the deck because of Nostradamus. So the other downside to this play is that I become weakest, so I get hit by strength events that I knew were in the deck. Again, I felt the benefit of the Revolution of Turn early was worth it, but I think in retrospect, I think maybe it wasn't, and delaying it just one more turn would have been okay, and, you know, I wouldn't have been hit by the strength events, so. Anyway, Sazmer plays the journalism with the Gutenberg action. This time, I think the lab should have been upgraded with the Gutenberg action. Anyway, they also take an organized religion to fix their happy face troubles and urban growth to help build their urban buildings. So Sazmer does pass up on Newton, but again, Sazmer is clearly aiming for Shakespeare. So that makes sense. I do think that when you have a transitional leader like Gutenberg, aiming for one particular H2 leader is not the best, because that can result, if Shakespeare is late, then Sazmer might sit on Gutenberg for several turns as he doesn't accomplish anything. On the other hand, Gutenberg will at least give Sazmer 2 more activations this game, so maybe that wouldn't be the end of the world if Sazmer had to sit on Gutenberg for a while. Thankfully, I am not punished for my play. Cleveland doesn't even seed, instead upgrades a farm, takes a journalism of their own, and Isaac Newton. Journalism plus Isaac Newton is an extremely strong combination. Cleveland would definitely have the population for it, so I think this line makes a lot of sense. Hot Hope Seeds reveals another strength event that I was hit by. A little unfortunate that this was revealed before I could increase my strength more, but that is also the risk I took by electing Robespierre last turn, so I have to eat it. Hot Hope plays the reserves, takes Ocean Line of Service, playing the reserves to open hand space for this selective breeding, and then gets out of corruption by upgrading a mine, upgrades the mine to get out of corruption, and then builds the warrior. Kind of an interesting choice, this warrior. I'm not sure why, frankly, but there's definitely a reason, so I would need to analyze Fatup's position more to say exactly why. Anyway, obviously I can't seed. Instead, I need to get my strength back a little bit, so I decide to just upgrade this warrior and not build anymore. The reason is that I didn't want to commit myself too strongly to warriors. Putting a 5th population into infantry is a little questionable, especially in my position. I don't have any bonus cards, so the chances of me being able to ship this another swordsman off to a colony seems quite low. And I felt that I also really, needed to like draw a tactic and stuff too, obviously. So it just felt that I think probably I must have known that like there aren't that many strength events left in this deck because I had Nostradamus. So I thought that next turn I will have the science to play Cavalryman, and with Wave of Nationalism too. So my plan was basically stay weakest for one more turn, and then next turn build some Cavalryman to diversify my army a little bit. And I could potentially copy the medieval army tactic with the Cavalryman. Or maybe if I draw a tactic or someone else plays a tactic that I could use with it. So that was my plan with doing this. I just didn't want to invest too strongly in infantry. Instead, I stick to the scientific method. Heavy cost for 3 civil actions, but that's one of the things you can do when you have Republic. In my case, I have 8 civil actions. You can make some inefficient plays. I really wanted to make sure I had this scientific method, so that Sazmer or Cleveman couldn't take it. It's a card that I really need to have. And with my remaining civil actions, I take some yellow cards that I'll be able to use, as well as this Organized Religion. Richland, I'm not able to use. So I had this 1 civil action left, and not really anything to do with it. Like I said, I didn't, I can't increase my population. I didn't want to put this population into a 3rd lab or anything. So I decided to just take the Organized Religion. It will at least be helpful. I will be able to upgrade these 2 temples to Organized Religions, thus enabling me to not have to put an extra population into temples anytime soon. I can just keep these 2. So taking this will basically free up an extra population for me down the line, and that definitely felt worth it. Oh yeah, and I still risked an aggression from Cleveland, but I decided that if Cleveland didn't train aggression against me last turn, their odds are Cleveland wouldn't try an aggression against me next turn either, so I felt comfortable risking it again for that reason. I was very fortunate to draw this copy of Terrorism when you're definitely the best card in the deck I could have drawn, except for maybe like Classic Army or something, because I will definitely have less culture than my opponents, so it'll be a very high value event for me. Well, like, almost definitely have less culture than my opponents. Anyway, Sazmar builds a journalism with Gutenberg and is also able to upgrade a coal mine, as well as take a rich land for future coal mine upgrades. This is definitely a strong turn for Sazmar. Cleveland indeed doesn't aggress against me. Instead, they say reveals a knowledge of the ancients, which is a bit better for Fat Hope than the rest of us. Cleveland now elects Newton because they are able to build a journalism with him. Thus, thus getting this combo going, very strong combo. Cleveland also takes the remaining 2 types of military technologies they need, so this is definitely quite a strong turn from Cleveland. Fortunately, they have to pass up the justice system, which might be nice for them, but Newton is also going to give them extra civil action, so they don't really need it that much. Cavalryman, well, maybe they could have used it. I mean, Cavalryman, like, obviously it will be helpful for them for H3 tactics potentially, but they do already have the Knights. Maybe Justice System would have been better than Cavalryman. But Cavalryman I can definitely see a case for, again, especially with Newton giving you extra civil actions. Fat Hope seeds and reveals to develop territory. So this time I decide to play a little trick where I bid 4 despite not having any bonus cards. For a couple reasons. One reason is to make my bluff that I have a bonus card more credible. And the second reason is to increase the cost of Fat Hope. I thought that, you know, obviously if I won it for 4 and had to ship 2 units off of it, it would have been, well, it would have been the end of the world. I still would have been able to rebuild them. So it would have been okay if I had to send 2 units off to the territory. But I mostly did it because I was very confident that Fat Hope would win this territory, so I would increase the cost for Fat Hope at least a little bit, and also make my bonus card bluff more credible. Anyway, Fat Hope sent away a knight to the territory. Fat Hope plays the Battle Circuses as well as the Republic. Also takes Darwin. Darwin definitely a strong leader for them in this situation, letting them get the strategy for free. And after building a swordsman and switching to a classic army, and then fulfilling that classic army, they are able to play the strategy and immediately shoot up to 20 strength. So the strength leader by a bullet right now. And they finish by upgrading another mine. So this is so Fat Hope really progressed their civilization a significant amount this turn. Extremely, probably the best single turn in the game so far. Actually, definitely the best single turn in the game so far. So my turn, even though I'm weakest, I said the terrorism, I wanted to make absolutely certain that the terrorism was in the next event deck, so it could come out as soon as possible. 2 of my opponents have journalisms I can destroy with it. Fat Hope doesn't really have anything too great to destroy with it, but destroying these 2 journalisms is definitely more than worth it. I actually did know the Readers was the next card because of Nostradamus, but again, I just thought that this is okay. I have a ton of resources. Anyway, and getting the terrorism in the next event deck, I wanted to just, like I said, guarantee that. Anyway, as I did do the plan I mentioned, play Wave of Nationalism to build 2 Cavalryman, especially now that Fat Hope played this classic army that I'll be able to copy next turn. I think this is definitely what I want to do. Making me not weakest anymore. I can then get out of corruption by increasing my population, and I decided to take the Harvard College. At this point, I'm facing a bit of a situation where I have a ton of resources and not a lot of science, and I'm now out of free population. So it's going to be a little difficult for me to spend on my resources in the following turns. That's why I thought it was so important for me to take the Harvard College. Just a good way to spend resources that doesn't cost science is exactly what I need right now. And obviously, you know, the science is going to be quite helpful, even with the scientific method. You know, because I've been on low science for so long, you know, I think it's still definitely more than worth it. In my final civil action, I take the Rifleman. I didn't have anything else I wanted to do with the civil action. You know, I didn't want any of these other cards, especially since they're text. So I decided to take the Rifleman just to make sure that I have, again, this tech that I can use with H3 tactics. Seems a lot better than anything else I could do with this civil action. I mean, I could have, you know, built a siege at the Harvard College, for example, but I have 8 civil actions. I don't really need to be too tight with my civil actions right now, and the Rifleman could be extremely helpful for me in H3. Discard one of my wars. Draw a tactic I probably won't use. Sazimir Siege reveals a national pride. Sazimir is actually able to win it. Sazimir, you know, not unexpectedly takes Shakespeare. You know, just advise him enough. I mean, he didn't have to take him this turn, though, but also the age is about to end anyway, so this also kind of only costs 2 civil actions, and it lets Sazimir immediately play this drama that they have to play this turn before the age ends. So taking Shakespeare this turn saves them 3 science, so it does seem worth it. They also build a knight to, it looks like they're still, well, with Himeji Castle, they're not vulnerable to an aggression, so just compete on strength a little more. Also use up a military action in H2. Cleveland Siege reveals a historic territory. Unfortunately, I kind of ruined the previous value of my bluff by only betting 2, so my colony betting this game, definitely not good. I think even in a game like this, where you don't win any colonies, what you bid in colonization definitely matters in terms of the information you give to the opponent, to your opponents, and just, you know, potentially making your opponents spend more for colonies they win. So I really did quite a poor job with my colony betting this game. Anyway, Fat Hope ends up winning this colony for only 1 unit. Cleveland takes the architecture, which will certainly, it's a pretty heavy civil action cost, but it will definitely be helpful for more journalisms. So if Cleveland didn't want any of these other cars on the row, maybe Cleveland, you know, has a tactic that doesn't need artillery. Although are they taking? So in that sense, it makes sense. You know, they get more science, more culture. So I understand this play from Cleveland. I mean, we can see Cleveland does indeed have a tactic that doesn't need artillery. They have the Hussars tactic, which also explains the cavalrymen more. Also playing that also means Cleveland isn't weakest on Fat Hope's turn. Fat Hope doesn't see they became weakest after winning the colony. Fat Hope does take the cannon, rebuilds their classic army, takes an efficient upgrade, then builds the Ocean Line service. We can see this tendency that Fat Hope has to prioritize these wonders over mine upgrades, which I think most of the time you want to upgrade the mines first before you finish the wonder. Now, they do have the efficient upgrade to be able to upgrade the mine for free next turn, but they could also upgrade the mine this turn and use the efficient upgrade on selective breeding later. On the other hand, selective breeding looks like it's going to be extremely not important with Fat Hope having so many yellow tokens as well as the Ocean Liner service. Although there is notably a red cross in the deck, so saving up some food with the selective breeding and the Ocean Liner service is not awful either. And they do ever take the Frugality, which again, not the most important of cards with the Ocean Liner service and all these yellow tokens, but it's perhaps better than taking the Opera, for example, so I can understand the Frugality. Age 3 begins. I never had a chance to play the Warfare. I decided to adopt the classic army instead of playing the Conquistadors. It's just, in general, a better tactic if you are already heavily invested in infantry, which I am. So it costs 1 more military action, so losing a card draw, especially in Age 3, you don't want to do, but I just thought that the extra strength benefits of the classic army were worth it. It makes me strongest, in fact. I am also finished the Harvard College, upgrade 2 temples, so that I have no unhappy workers. I think I might have had knowledge of some unhappy worker events. Maybe I didn't, but just in general, it's nice to do, especially if you have nothing better to do, which I didn't really, because I didn't really want any of these cards except the opera and the cannon. Now, I could have definitely taken the urban growth to use on my scientific method, but I already have these 2 rock yellow cards, and I have the Machu Picchu. So, an urban growth for 2 civil actions and H2 urban growth for 2 civil actions didn't seem the best use. And I value these 2 technologies more. Cannon, obviously, if I don't need it for this tactic, but if I draw an H3 tactic with it, especially in this situation where, we'll talk about that more in a bit, but my opponents are definitely getting a significant culture lead over me. I want to set myself up for a war comeback if I can. And so I want to set myself up for H3 tactics if I can. As for the opera, you know, there's a chance that I might not be able to use it for sure, but I felt that the opera was another potential way for, obviously, a way to get some peaceful culture. It also, I guess the main reason I took the opera, I mentioned this in my last video, but when you have Robespierre, you want to leave yourself open to as many H3 leaders as possible, because you really want to replace him early if you can. And so the opera makes Chaplin and Fleming much more reasonable leaders for me to take. So I think that's the major reason I want to have the opera, even though there isn't, you know, there isn't a Hollywood. So that's why I picked these over the urban growth. I drew an impact of progress. Sasmer is finally able to get an H2 government, destroys a lab to build a theater with Shakespeare, and then destroys a mine to put into the military. So Sasmer is definitely kind of destroying the economy to focus much more heavily on culture and military. And they also take that urban growth. So now that everyone has taken a turn after H3 began, we can take a look at the current situation. As I mentioned previously, I'm definitely starting to fall behind in culture. Now, not by that much quite yet. I'm 10 behind Cleveland. I'm about 20 behind Fat Hope and 30 behind Sasmer. But Cleveland and Sasmer also have significantly more cultural production than I do. And Fat Hope has a little more than I do. So I'm definitely going to need to figure out a way to get some culture going one way or the other. The problem with that, though, is... I think I mentioned this in the last video, but it's more relevant in this video, where I think even though Robespierre is an extremely powerful leader, in my opinion, he's maybe the strongest H2 leader. At least it's between him and Newton. I think a sort of hidden weakness with Robespierre is that he really encourages you to play Republic, because you get the Republic for so cheaply with him. However, the Republic obviously only leaves you with 2 military actions, or 3 when Robespierre is your leader, and then 2 when he isn't. And Robespierre himself only gives you that one-shot boost of culture when you do a revolution with him. And so what I found sometimes is that, like, somewhat often I've ended up in a situation like this one, where I'm behind in culture to my opponents with no obvious way to, like, catch up quickly. And I'm on Republic, which makes it a lot harder to get a big war going against my opponents. So I'm not entirely sure what to make of this tendency. I think partly it's a skill issue on my end, where I need to be more careful with how I play Robespierre. But I think it's also just partly, like, something to keep in mind with Robespierre, where if you go with the Robespierre Revolution to Republic, it is extremely strong. But you need to sort of think of, okay, how can I keep up with my opponents in culture? And in my case, that was more difficult to do, because neither of my first 2 wonders give me any culture production. So I think maybe something I need to keep in mind is that if I am not getting any culture from my wonders, that makes Robespierre somewhat worse. I mean, I still think he was definitely the right leader for me to take in the situation I was in, because of just how strong, because of, you know, obviously I had no science, really needed an H2 government, so it's not that I regret taking him, it's just, I guess, something I need to keep in mind more. Regardless, in terms of science, obviously Cleveland with Newton is doing the best in science. Fat Hope is kind of struggling with science production a little bit. But in exchange, that's partly because Fat Hope got the H2 government. We can see that Cleveland now has the worst civil and military action situation compared to all their opponents, because they're still on monarchy with no additional help there. In terms of rocks, I'm still doing the best of my opponents, but they've caught up to me to a certain extent. Food is looking about the same. Yeah, so I would say for Cleveland, their economy is good. The military situation is at least passable, although, I mean, they're weakest right now, so they kind of went from strongest to weakest, but they were able to leverage their strong military into increasing the economy more. I would say Cleveland's Cleveland's major weakness right now is definitely their civil and military action situation. They will need to find a way to try to fix that, try to get an H3 government pretty soon. At least they have a lot of science production to help them with that H3 government. And they also obviously need to keep up in military. Fat Hope is doing pretty well in military. They're going to have the ocean liner service and a lot of population soon. So I think Fat Hope's major strength right now is in their population. They also will have a ton of civil actions with both this Republic and Darwin. And the strategy and the Coliseum is also giving them sufficient military action. So their civil and military actions are by far the best out of everyone. And they have a lot of population. Their major weakness is in their rocks and their science. And Sasmer is pretty soon going to have the best... I mean, Sasmer already has the best culture by a pretty substantial margin of everyone. And they're keeping up relatively well in strength, especially with Himeji Castle. But to achieve this, they've sacrificed their economy pretty substantially. So I would say right now, it's kind of hard to say who's winning. I don't think anyone is in an obviously dominant position. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses. I think Sasmer, given that this is a 4-player game, having this type of economy is going to make it difficult, but the economy isn't like in tatters or anything either. They're gonna have 7 rock income presumably next turn. Their science income is passable. They have a decent amount of population. They have the Himeji Castle. So I would say Sasmer's position is definitely far from like hopeless or anything like that. And everyone else also has things that are working for them. So I think right now the game is kind of up for grabs. Like I said, in my case, you know, I have probably the best economy just in terms of a balance between my income and my civil and military actions, but I just need to find a way to leverage that into culture in H3. Especially with only having 3 military actions, soon to be 2 if I lose Robespierre. It might be hard for me to come back in a war. Anyway, Cleveland is able to get the first copy of Air Forces, and then decides to take the revolutionary idea. This will let them play an H3 government next turn potentially, and they are also able to not be weakest anymore by upgrading to 2 Cavalryman. Unfortunately, that also cost them draws in H3, but that's the way it has to go sometimes. Fat Hope Seeds reveals a rebellion, which only hits Cleveland. Obviously, I was rewarded for upgrading these temples last turn. Fat Hope decides to take the oil, a pick that makes a lot more sense when they take Marie Curie as well. I think Fat Hope didn't necessarily have to replace Darwin soon. Maybe Fat Hope has knowledge of iconoclasm, but this might be a little bit of an iconoclasm tell, but I don't think it has to be either. Definitely Marie Curie with oil is quite strong. Fat Hope will be able to do that next turn. Fat Hope maybe can aim to... Doing this will also reward Fat Hope for not finishing upgrading their mines. Fat Hope can just upgrade 2 mines to oils, destroy this mine to have an extra population. On the other hand, Fat Hope is going to have so much population thanks to the ocean liner service that they probably won't need to destroy this mine. But they can also just upgrade the bronze mine directly to oil, with Silk Road helping with their efficient upgrades, for example. So that might be something they aim to do. It's my turn. I seed. I wanted to seed because I'm strongest, and I think the impact of progress at least looked like a relatively even impact. I reeled inhabited territory. As I can say, I bid. I guess 2 units, a cavalryman and a swordsman. I wasn't really expecting to win it, and indeed I didn't. Sasmer did. Sasmer was able to win it for only 1 warrior. Definitely a good deal for Sasmer. I decided to go ahead and get more science this turn. I didn't really have anything else I had to do. I mean, right now I'm strongest, and I had nothing else to really to spend my resources on. So this did seem right to me. And the next choice I made is kind of an interesting one, where I decided to take the Eiffel Tower. There were 2 reasons I did this. The first reason is that I obviously have a lot of rocks. I mean, like I said, the rocks is kind of my main advantage at this point, but I don't necessarily have that much to do with them. Next time I'm gonna have 2 free population, and I could put them both in Cavalryman, for instance. That wouldn't be bad, but I also, you know, I have all these yellow cards too. The other reason I thought that the other two reasons, I guess there's three reasons. So one reason is just to have something to sink my rocks into, where I'm sort of running up. I'm gonna run up on my population limit relatively soon. The second reason is obviously to give me culture production, where, as I mentioned before, I was kind of worried about, like, how am I going to win this game? It's definitely nowhere near guaranteed that I'll be able to win with a big war. First of all, because I can't guarantee I'll draw a war. Second, again, I don't know if I'll have enough military actions to really be able to threaten a big war. And if I want to win peacefully, this Eiffel Tower's extra culture production found potentially very valuable. And the third reason I decided to take the Eiffel Tower is because the Happy Face is also going to be extremely valuable. As we can see, without the Eiffel Tower, once I get 2 more population, one of them is going to be unhappy. But with it, it will be happy. So this Eiffel Tower basically also represents 1 additional population for me that I won't have to put into a temple. I mean, or an opera, but, like, the Eiffel Tower, you know, I have enough. I mean, I could spend my several actions taking these resource yellow cards, but, like, you know, being able... Well, actually, yeah, putting a population in opera isn't free. So, because of that, this Eiffel Tower not only represents culture for me and a rock sink, but it also represents 1 additional population for me. And the conclusion I've come to, you know, I think that, you know, I mentioned this before, but, you know, I sort of learned how to play the game by watching Weidenbaum videos, and in general, my sense of the Eiffel Tower is one of the least popular wonders in the game. But I've taken it several times now, and my general feeling is that, when the Happy Face is directly valuable to you, as it is for me right now, Eiffel Tower is actually a good wonder. I'm not going to claim it's, like, great or anything, or, like, as good as Ocean Liner Service, or definitely not as good as, like, a big Suez or whatever. But I think it's, like, a fine wonder. It's worth it to take when the Happy Face is directly helpful for you. And I also take Winston Churchill just as a replacement leader for Robespierre. I don't elect him yet, partly because, you know, I'll have enough science to do an H3 government form revolution next turn, and partly because I wanted to get my 3rd draw, so to give me extra chances to draw into a war, especially with Churchill. But I didn't elect him yet, but he is obviously just a good replacement leader that I don't need anything in particular to get value out of. I draw 2 impact. Unfortunately, I don't draw a war. I draw 2 impacts. At least these are both suitable impacts for me, as well as a modern army. So my distant seed instead takes 2 military techs, builds 2, gets another duo going with Shakespeare, and takes a military build up and increase the population. So Sasmer, you know, does, you know, what you want to do with Shakespeare, right? You get the culture engine going, and then you prepare to defend yourself. Sasmer does, however, stay weakest and is vulnerable to an aggression, although not... I mean, I could try an aggression and, like, call Sasmer's bluff of potentially not having a bonus card, but neither of the aggressions, like, I can't annex... Well, I could annex Sasmer and get some yellow tokens, maybe. So that might be one thing you want to consider. However, aggressing Sasmer would also carry the downside for me of losing military actions to draw towards war. So, anyway, and again, Sasmer is still able to defend. Oh, actually, sorry, I forgot Himeji Castle. So yeah, with Himeji Castle, Sasmer can definitely, right, 16, 18. Yeah, Sasmer is guaranteed to defend an aggression with Himeji Castle. So, Cleveland Seas reveals an international agreement, which I do win. We'll talk about that on my turn. Cleveland takes a democracy and it tanks, but even though Cleveland could play with democracy this turn, with the revolutionary idea, they choose not to. Perhaps they have a plan for the science. I mean, maybe like air forces plus cannons or tanks or something like that. But it's still a little interesting that they don't play the democracy this turn. Fat Hope Seeds reveals developed territory. I try to bid more for this, but there's only so much I can do with no bonus cards, so Fat Hope ends up winning it for only 1 unit. Fat Hope, as mentioned before, upgrades to oil to get a lot of value from Marie Curie. Marie Curie is giving an extra 3 science production now. No extra strength, unfortunately, without any labs going, but still 3 science plus 3 culture a turn. That is effectively the same as Einstein with computers or multimedia, so that's definitely strong. And Fat Hope, you know, takes, I think that's the second copy of Air Forces, yes. As well as some yellow cards, and then rebuilds their military. Again, Plagues of Borea, maybe this is for colonies. Or potentially maybe for freedom of movement. They are able to just get strongest, though. Anyway, in my turn, I had a choice to make. So, obviously, I could take cards from the international agreement, and that would be extremely strong. However, it would be a significant cost. If you recall, I had seeded the terrorism into this deck, and it hasn't been revealed yet. So, if I don't seed and instead take the international agreement, that means that the terrorism will be revealed not on my turn. And because of the way it works, right, even if, say, Sazmir sees and it's revealed immediately, I would not actually be able to activate it until my following turn, because I only destroy buildings on my own turn. And so, if the terrorism is not revealed right now, then it'll have to wait an additional entire turn cycle before it actually activates. And I sort of felt kinda behind right now. Again, I'm really falling behind in culture right now, and I don't even have a war in my hand. I only have 3 military actions. I will fix that military action situation soon, but not the war situation. So I sort of felt kind of behind, and like I wanted to take the risk of, like, you know, there's only obviously a 50% chance that the terrorism will be revealed if I seed now, but I felt that 50% chance was worth taking. In retrospect, I think that my position is not as bad as it maybe seemed at the time. So, it's maybe better. Yeah, my position was definitely not as bad as I felt it was. I think I was paying too much attention to the culture difference. And, I mean, this culture difference, especially in a 4-player game, is actually not that hard to make up, even in just 1 or 2 turns. So I think I actually should have taken the guaranteed value from the international agreement instead. Anyway, I did see it. I seeded the impact that I knew I would win. Unfortunately, I got unlucky that terrorism is the last card in the deck. Instead, the wealthy territory is revealed, which Fat Hope ends up winning for 2 units, but that's still obviously good for them. Hello? Okay, so this was a turn. I think actually pretty much all my turns from this point on I spent a fair amount of time on. Because again, I had to think, like, how am I going to win this game? So one thing I considered was, like, you know, finishing the Eiffel Tower, and, you know, maybe taking some other things. So basically, like, finishing the Eiffel Tower would be the, I think I can compete peacefully. So I tried to figure out, is it possible for me to win this game peacefully without drawing a war? And I ended up deciding that it's not possible. I think it's kind of hard to say. I mean, yeah, I'm pretty far behind in culture, but again, it is a 4-player game. There's going to be a lot of impact seeded. My economy is good. I could finish the Eiffel Tower this turn to at least compete somewhat more in culture production. So I think that maybe it would be possible to win this game peacefully. But it is hard to say. I mean, I am pretty far behind. But at the time, I felt that it wasn't, and that I needed instead to maximize my chances of drawing a war. And well, first of all, if I want to win with a war, I need more military action, so I needed this fundamentalism. So the first thing I decided to do was to take this revolutionary idea. Thanks to the Harvard College, I am able to play it this turn. So I was fortunate, definitely highly fortunate, that this revolutionary idea appeared right now, the last card to appear on my turn, because it let me well, here's what it let me do. I can do the fundamentalism revolution without the revolutionary idea. So again, one thing I considered was, like, not taking this revolutionary idea and, like, finishing Eiffel Tower or something, but I thought that I needed the revolutionary idea because by playing it, I would have just barely enough science to play the military theory this turn after electing Churchill. And I felt that I needed to play the military theory this turn because it gave me 3 draws. Obviously, you know, I would say the major weakness of Robespierre, I think, God, I forget who said it right now in the Discord. But someone on the Discord said that I think it might have been Martin for sure. Maybe not. So, a very good player on the Discord said that the major weakness of Robespierre is that he doesn't let you draw the turn you do the revolution with him. And I agree with that. Drawing military cards, especially in Age 3, is extremely important. And especially for me, like I said, where I felt that I really needed to draw a war, or else there was no way I could win. And so that's why I thought that by doing the revolution and then playing the military theory, I am now able to draw 3 cards. And specifically, like I said, aiming for a war. So that's why I did it this way. Unfortunately, a cost is that I'm in corruption, even if I built a unit this turn, which I didn't really want to do because I wanted to maximize my draws. But even if I did, I would still just barely be in corruption, so there's no reason to. But I thought that taking corruption was a trade-off I was willing to take to draw these 3 cards this turn. So I was really, really crossing my fingers, hoping for a war, and I did not get it. Instead, I got 2 tactics and a bonus card. So after this draw, I was kind of starting to lose hope in this game. Sazmar plays the military build-up to upgrade 2 warriors to modern infantry to compete in strength better. At least by, doing this play, I mean, I get 11 strength just from these 2 technologies, right? So that did push me in strength a lot, so my opponents have to respond to that. Sazmar decides to take the Red Cross wonder, interestingly. But, I mean, probably Sazmar doesn't have much better to do. It is some guaranteed culture for them. There's, I think, a fair amount of colonies were played, too. Cleveland plays Democracy this turn. Also is able to take Mandela to play him. So Mandela, Cleveland maybe could have considered Gandhi instead. I mean, it might have been difficult for Cleveland to win peacefully with Gandhi because Sazmar's culture lead is getting bigger. But Cleveland does have a better economy than Sazmar, so definitely could have tried to just compete with Sazmar peacefully. And with democracy and without any guarantee that Cleveland will get a military theory, the chances of Cleveland getting a war going seem pretty remote. So I think maybe Gandhi instead could have been better for Cleveland. Anyway, Cleveland does take some yellow cards as well as a multimedia to push the culture more. Fat Hope. Oh yeah, did Cleveland build the Red Cross? Yeah. So Fat Hope also builds the Red Cross. Takes an efficient upgrade for some more mine upgrades, presumably. Builds some more into their military. Also builds an air forces and takes a patriotism. So by focusing on the military, it definitely appears that Cleveland is setting up for a potential war next turn. They also become strongest by doing this, notably. It's not really a concern of mine, though, whether or not Fat Hope is planning up for war, because I'm planning for I'm kind of planning for my own war. No one actually seeded, so I have to seed my impact of competition. At least it's about a neutral impact for me, I think. To finally reveal that terrorism. Unfortunately, it was lucky for me to draw it, but it ended up getting revealed quite late. At least I was able to do it now. And as we can see, I was able to destroy 2 journalisms, as well as, well, destroying Fat Hope's lab is not really that important. But the journalisms definitely are. But yeah, even though I still haven't drawn any wars, I really felt at this point that, especially with the play I did last time, kind of pot committed to trying to get the big war going. So I decided to go ahead, and after putting the Red Cross, I decided to, also finally build my Eiffel Tower. I have the resources for it because, I can take the Air Forces, and with the 3 extra resources from Churchill, plus these 2, I will have next turn 9, plus 6 is 15, 18, so, Yeah, that's not enough for 2 armies and 2 air forces, so maybe I shouldn't have built the Eiffel Tower. I guess in retrospect, yeah, the Eiffel Tower didn't end up being... Maybe it was too much of a rock sink, given my decision to push military more. Yeah. I ended up drawing Impact of Colonies, Impact of Strength, and Armed Aggression. Still no wars. So with no wars drawn now, I was starting to have highly doubts. On the other hand, at least finishing the Eiffel Tower gives me a little bit of extra insurance against not drawing any wars. And indeed, I end up not drawing any wars. So it's a little bit of a balancing out, even though I'm still... I mean, I'm at least not that far behind, say, Fat Hope. Summer Seeds and Reveal. Card that I was quite delighted to see this strategic territory. Giving me a chance to get 5 more cards potentially drawn to wars. I think, if I recall correctly, 11 was the exact amount I bet on it too, because it's 3... Yeah, it's 2 of these plus the Swordsman plus a bonus card. Which is a lot to spend, but I felt that it was really worth it so that I could potentially draw a war, which I really, really wanted to have. However, I think the way I did it was not smart. I sent away a Cavalryman basically into the logic of, you know, I wanted to give myself a chance, you know, maybe if I wanted to build a modern army or something, the Cavalryman wasn't needed. However, I think that logic also doesn't make any sense, and I really should have kept the Cavalryman instead of the Rifleman, not only because I have a lot more Riflemen than Cavalrymen, but also because there's a chance that I might draw shock troops. And as we can take a quick look at my civilization, you can see that I only have enough science next turn for the air forces and not air forces plus cannons. So if I want air forces, I need a tactic that works only on infantry and cavalry, which in age 3 means shock troops. So I should have kept the second Cavalryman instead of the Rifleman in case I drew shock troops. And as we can see, by winning that colony, I did draw both a war and shock troops. So even though I hadn't drawn a war until now, you know, I drew it. Well, I drew the hybrid war here too. But yeah, literally the last card I could have. But I also drew it with the only age 3 tactic that I could use with air forces. So that was definitely highly fortunate. I did kind of freak out a bit, you know, after I made the move. I was like, oh wait, I made a mistake. Am I still able to get those shock troops plus an air forces? And I actually still am, as long as the age doesn't end before my turn. I will have just barely enough resources, thanks to my Churchill bonus and these 2 cards, to build 2 Cavalryman and 1 air forces. However, because my opponents have so many civil actions, it was possible for the age to end before my turn. So it was still a pretty big mistake on my end. That being said, after finishing the Red Cross, Sazmar takes this military theory for 3 civil actions. So because Sazmar didn't take that many cards, that makes it much less likely that the age will end before my turn. They also, I guess, use a free military action. Cleveland Siege. This territory I did not want to put any military into, like I said, because I am going to do a war next turn. Sazmar ends up winning it just for that 1 warrior they played. Maybe they were planning on that, and that's why they built the warrior. Cleveland rebuilds the journalism that I destroyed, as well as building an air force, and then taking pro sports because they'll have happy face issues soon, as well as like another potential card, you know, for some potential peaceful, culture plays. However, I do wonder the second journalism, you know, those 6 rocks could have, I guess, you know, they still have enough to build 1 air force next turn. The extra 6 rocks would have only been enough for another Cavalryman, so maybe those 6 rocks are, you know, it's basically as good as the journalism. Pat Hope has a war. Interestingly, a war against Sazmar. As we will see, Sazmar, especially with Himeji Castle, is able to get to very significantly higher amount of strength than Cleveland. I think the reason, if I had to speculate, the reason Fat Hope warred Sazmar is, as we can see, Sazmar has 20 culture more than Cleveland. So if Sazmar warred Cleveland, if Fat Hope warred Cleveland, Fat Hope would definitely finish second, but they may not be able to finish first because Sazmar might finish first if Fat Hope warred Cleveland. So I think probably Fat Hope warred Sazmar because Sazmar is the culture leader, and even though it will be a smaller war, they will take culture from a more valuable opponent. At least that's my guess. As we can see, Sazmar is able to get 2 armies plus 2 air forces for a total of 62 strength, and they will still have enough rocks to finish this United Nations next turn. So that's definitely a good turn from Fat Hope. But as I mentioned, I have just enough to get an army plus an air force, to get a shock troops plus an air force. So my choice this turn, I mean, I definitely warring. The question is just who to war. And I spent a fair amount of time on it. I won't bore you with all the details, but I basically tracked what the culture situation would look like if I warred Sazmur, what the culture situation would look like if I warred Cleveman. And I also took into account that against me, Sazmur would have less strength because they would likely sacrifice a unit against Fat Hope's war. But even with that consideration, the conclusion I came to is, if I warred Sazmur, then I would definitely finish ahead of Sazmur, but I would probably not finish ahead of Cleveman. So I would almost certainly finish third if I warred Sazmur. Whereas if I warred Cleveman, because Cleveman is able to threaten much less strength than Sazmur, we can actually take a quick look. It's very easy to see the strength that Cleveland can threaten because they only have these 7 rocks. They have no rock yellow cards. There's no H2 events in the event deck to help them. And there's no other possible tactic they could have that would help them, really. There's no, like, H3 tactic that could work because they would only be able to build 1 cannon, for example, which wouldn't be enough. So, it's very easy to tell, like, so you can basically say, well, Cleveland can build 1 air forces. So, Cleveland can get +9 strength. And that's it. Whereas Sazmur has this resource on the military theory. So, Cleveland is going to be at 38 strength, presumably, after their turn. Sazmur is going to be at, with the reserves, they will have 11 rocks, so they can build 1 more army. So they'll be at 5, 7, 9. They'll be at +14, so that'll be 38. So Sazmur will have equivalent strength to Cleveland, but like I said, that's not considering sacrificing a unit to Himeji Castle. Right, which will give Sazmur. So if Sazmur sacrifices, if Sazmur sacrifices a unit to Fat Hope, that will give Sazmur maybe -7 strength against me, but then they could get +5 strength against me by sacrificing a knight, for example. So I guess it's about the same amount of strength that Cleveland and Sazmur can threaten, but unless I did something wrong. 9, 14, yeah. But, like I said, Sazmur already has this war against them, basically. So because Sazmur is already being warred by Fat Hope, that means that Sazmur will have much less culture than Cleveland after that war resolves. And so that's why by warring Cleveland, if I ward Sazmur, while that would guarantee Sazmur finishes 4th, I would not have enough culture to meaningfully challenge Cleveland. Whereas by warring Cleveland, I will be able to leech enough culture off of Cleveland that basically Cleveland will definitely finish 4th, and I will have about as much culture as Sazmur, and then I'll be able to compete on impacts. So basically I concluded if I ward Sazmur, I would almost certainly finish 3rd, whereas if I ward Cleveland, I would have a good chance of finishing 2nd. I didn't really have much hope of finishing 1st at this point, because Fat Hope is going to get a lot of culture from this war, and also Fat Hope has this wonder that I don't have. But my turn itself is pretty set. This is the only thing I can do, and I have to play both of my yellow cards, and then I destroyed a mine because it, I have the Machu Picchu, so it's more balanced than destroying a lab would be. Can't destroy a farm without being below the consumption line when the age ends. But yeah, we can see just enough, pretty much just enough rocks to get this going. So this gives, with the shock troops tactic and the air forces, I'm able to get at 57 strength, which is pretty close to Fat Hope. I mean, it's a decent amount of strength, especially in this game where the opponents aren't really pushing strength that much. And for my civil actions, I did consider the endowment, because this will probably represent 6 culture for me. But I felt that the satellites was more important. First of all, to get it from Cleveland. Cleveland, could certainly... the satellites is the only strength tech left in the deck. So I felt there was a... Sazmur probably... Sazmur is going to have their hands full with the war, so they would probably leave it to Cleveland. So I figured if I didn't take this, Cleveland almost certainly would be able to get it. So that would cost me 3 culture. And recall, I also have the Impact of Progress seeded, which could definitely be revealed before my turn, but it might not be. And if it isn't, then this would represent 6 culture, which is as much as the endowment, plus, additional potential benefits from impact of variety or the like. So that's why I decided that this one is better than the endowment. Sasmer Seeds reveals an impact of government. This, I think, is a little bit... Yeah, it's just barely good for me compared to my opponents. So, pretty good impact for me that I didn't seed. And Sasmer, we can see, is able to play the military theory and build an additional army. And, oh right, yeah, Sasmer is also able to copy the classic army tactics. So, with this, Sasmer is definitely able to threaten substantially more strength with Himeji Castle than Cleveland is. Age 4 begins. Cleveland sees. Unfortunately, the impact of progress is revealed before I can play this headlights, but that's how it goes sometimes. It's still, as we can see, a neutral event for me. Neutral impact for me. So Cleveland, instead of building an air forces, decides to build an arena and upgrade to tanks. So instead of getting +9, that gives Cleveland +6. So that'll give me an additional 3 culture than we've gotten otherwise, but it prepares Cleveland better for impacts, especially the impact of... I mean, there's the impact of competition that I seeded, and this also is probably a tell that Cleveland seeded an impact of happiness. Because I know it wasn't... Because I have knowledge of the impact of competition. And then Cleveland takes some cards. So Fat Hope ends up getting 19 culture. Sasmer sacrificed, but is able to get additional culture from that, from the armed intervention. Sasmer sacrificed Violent Infantry to Himeji. Fat Hope now upgrades a farm, plays them on an infantry technology, is able to get an arena with the urban growth, and finishes United Nations. Fat Hope gets 16 culture from the United Nations, but Fat Hope does not evaluate an event to it, so unfortunately. But it's still obviously 16 culture better than nothing. It gives Fat Hope pretty solidly the culture lead at this point in time. So it's my turn now. Okay, I wasn't able to do it before I seeded. I should have paused a bit earlier, sorry. But this is another turn I actually spent a fair amount of time on, because my choice was to seed either the... Well, I had 3 choices, right? I could do an armed intervention, but it was definitely worse for me than seeding an impact would be. But I had a choice of which impact to seed, strength or harmony. And here's what the choice basically came down to. The impact of strength I will be able to win, but as you can see, Fat Hope will come in second. Whereas the impact of harmony, my harmony value is at 4, as is Sasmer's. Cleveland's is at 5. But notably, Fat Hope's harmony value is only at 2, thanks to only having 2 urban buildings. So basically, the impact of strength will give me 5 culture against Fat Hope, not counting the 3 from the seeding. Whereas the impact of harmony will give me 8 culture against Fat Hope. So if my goal is, you can look at the culture values, but, Cleveland is definitely going to be in 4th, unfortunately. And Fat Hope is pretty substantially above Sasmer, too. So basically, my competition for finishing first is Fat Hope, and my competition for finishing second is Sasmer. So if I want to have the greatest chance of competing with Fat Hope for first, I would actually want to see the impact of harmony. But if I want to make sure that I get second instead of Sasmer, then I want to see the impact of strength, because the impact of strength will give me either 10 or 15 points against Sasmer. So what I did was I went through every single impact that I hadn't seen that could be in the deck and figured out, how many points each impact will give to each player. And again, I won't bore you with the details, but the eventual conclusion I came to is that, maybe somewhat surprisingly, most of the impacts are neutral to favorable for me. Some are negative. I think especially impact of culture is negative. But the thing about impact of culture is it's especially negative for Fat Hope. So it is actually, maybe somewhat surprisingly, possible for me to win this game. However, it basically requires one specific impact for me to win this game, which is impact of science. Because impact of science, even though I have fundamentalism, thanks to Harvard College and my 2 scientific methods, I am guaranteed to win Impact of Science. I mean, I'm ahead of Cleveland, I'm ahead of Fat Hope, and Sazmo on their turn can only get 7 science production max. So if Impact of Science is in the deck, I will get 15 off of it, and Fat Hope would get 0 off of it, assuming Sazmo builds a journalism, which I assumed Sazmo would. So Impact of Science giving me 15 points against Fat Hope would actually make it, like, very plausible for me to finish first. But I felt that Impact of Science was pretty unlikely to be in the deck, precisely because I would win it right. Now, unlikely isn't impossible. Like, I could see the logic. Maybe one of my opponents felt that maybe... I think, you know, for most of Age 3, I probably seemed like I was doing the worst out of everyone. So maybe someone sees the Impact of Science thinking that even if I won it, that would be okay because I was doing the worst out of everyone. Or, you know, maybe they had some other reasons for seeing it. Maybe they knew I'd win it, but thought that it was still more important for them to get more culture from it. You know, it's hard to say for sure. But I think in general, it's probably not wise to, like, put high odds of an impact being in the deck that, like, you would win. That, you know, there's not an impact you seeded, right? I think it also... I didn't go through the full math. It might be the case that, like, if Impact of Science is in the deck, I will win whether I seed Strength or Harmony. Whereas if Impact of Science isn't in the deck, I will never finish first, regardless of what I seed. I didn't actually go through. I mean, that's pretty difficult math to work through. I mean, well, you can work out, like, if the impacts of the deck are, like, completely perfect for you, what you can get. But, like, the chances of the impacts being totally perfect for you are obviously quite low. So it's the math of these impact calculations gets really complicated really quickly. So I can't state with certainty that if Impact of Science is in the deck, I will win. Well, I can't say if Impact of Science is in the deck, then I think it is actually very likely I'll finish first. But I can't say for sure, like, if Impact of Science isn't in the deck, but I see Impact of Harmony, what are the chances I'll finish first? That's not something that I really thought through. I probably should have. But regardless, the conclusion I basically came to was the only way I can finish first is if Impact of Science is in the deck, and I didn't think it was likely Impact of Science was in the deck. So for that reason, I felt that rather than take the somewhat more of a long shot to finish first ahead of Fat Hope, it made more sense to see the Impact of Strength, which effectively guaranteed when the game ends before Impact Evaluation, Sazmo will have a little bit more culture than me. But, like, again, I went through all the possible impacts, including the ones I had seeded, and most of them are much better for me than for Sazmo. So basically, by seeing Impact of Strength, I almost guarantee that I will finish ahead of Sazmo at least, meaning I'll finish at least second. And like I said, because I thought that Impact of Science was unlikely, I felt more comfortable guaranteeing a second place finish than trying a long shot for first. Anyway, because I seeded the Impact of Strength, that means that I am going to be building an Air Force this turn, which combined with the satellites will let me get more strength than Fat Hope. So building an Air Force will also get me through from competition, but by seeding, I risk competition being revealed. But luckily for me, I was unlucky with the terrorism timing, but balances out, I'm quite lucky with the competition timing. Competition ended up being the last impact in this event deck, which means that I will get the full value out of it on my turn when I build this Air Forces. And like I said, Air Forces plus satellites means I am 2 strength ahead of Fat Hope. And that's all I can do on my turn, so otherwise I just take cards. Sazmo seeds, revealing that impact of competition. It ends up being... yeah, I get a little bit more out of it than my opponents. And Sazmo pretty much does the only thing they can, which is build another journalism, and then builds a lab. Yeah, I guess I should mention, oh, I forgot to mention, another reason to seed Harmony over Strength is that if I see the impact of Harmony, I wouldn't need to build this Air Force, meaning I would keep the second mine, which I would want to do, so anyway, because of Harmony, right? And keeping the second mine would be better slightly for impact of industry and impact of balance. But, you know, with me having to destroy something to build the second Air Force, you know, if I destroyed the farm, then I would have equal production to consumption, meaning that I would not get the bonus for culture from agriculture. So that's why I didn't destroy the farm. And I didn't destroy the lab because of a potential impact of architecture, and also the outside chance that someone did see the impact of science. Anyway, now that we're about to get to impact evaluation, we can see the culture situation. So Cleveland, so right now it's pretty clear, unfortunately, thanks to my big war against them, that Cleveland will finish last. But the other positions are somewhat up for grabs. Right now, Fat Hope is in the lead at 191, 10 points ahead of Sazmer, but only 10 after that war, which is maybe not as much as you might expect. And Sazmer is only 6 points ahead of me. So, as I said, even though my cultural situation was looking kind of sketchy for most of H3, can change in a hurry, you know, especially when you get a big war like I ended up getting. So, but as I said, I calculated the impacts and how they would affect, and I was very confident that I would finish ahead of Sazmer, but it was pretty unlikely that I finished ahead of Fat Hope. I basically need Impact of Science to be in the deck to finish first. But if Impact of Science is in the deck, I actually have a good chance of finishing first, which is not something that I expected before doing those calculations. Also, as a bit of behind-the-scenes talk, the game actually happened to finish right as I got on a call with a friend of mine who plays Through the Ages. So I was able to give that friend my live reactions to the impacts being revealed. I didn't record that, though, unfortunately. But with the situation revealed, we can now get to those impacts. So the first impact is an impact of population, not one that I seeded. It unfortunately is one of the bad impacts in the deck for me. As you can see, I get less of it. I lose 2 against Sazmer, and I lose 6 against Fat Hope. So I am now 22 points below Fat Hope. The next impact is the impact of happiness. This one, though, is good for me. I get 4 points against these 2 opponents. I'm not worried about Cleveland at this point. So I'm now only 4 behind Sazmer, and I'm 18 behind Fat Hope. The next impact is the impact of culture. This is one that I was expecting. It's one reason why I wanted to make sure. There's one reason why I was worried about potentially finishing 3rd behind Sazmer if I seeded the impact of Harmony, because as we can see, Sazmer gets 5 points against me from it. At least I get 5 points against Fat Hope, though. So even though I'm 9 points behind Sazmer, which I'm going to make up with the impact of strength, I am now only 13 points behind Fat Hope. The next impact is the impact of strength that I seeded. So as we can see, this gives me 15 points against Sazmer. So this is why I was so confident I would finish ahead of Sazmer. I'm now 6 ahead of Sazmer. And I think one of the impacts left in the deck is when I see it. Maybe it isn't. But, yeah, basically very few of the impacts left would help Sazmer. So this is why I was so confident in finishing ahead of Sazmer. But I'm still 8 points behind Fat Hope. And it would be pretty hard to finish first now, unless there's that impact of science. But there is the impact of science. And, yeah, I kind of whooped it up a little when I saw this live. As I said, I really was not expecting it. But, who boy did it help me out. I am now leapfrog ahead of Fat Hope. I'm actually 7 ahead of Fat Hope with only 1 impact left. And most impacts would still let me finish ahead of Fat Hope, including this one, the impact of balance, which is basically even for everyone except Cleveland. And it means that I end up somehow finishing first in this game by only 7 points. This was an interesting game, looking back on it. In some ways, I feel that I maybe played better than the previous game. The previous 4-player game, obviously, I won by a lot more, but I think that things were pretty fortunate for me in that game, both on the cards I drew and in the way the card row went and stuff like this. That this game was much less fortunate than for me. You know, I drew almost no bonus cards, so I was basically never able to compete for colonies in this game. I kind of had some struggles with strength. Obviously, Cleveland pushed strength really early, and I had several turns where I risked an aggression. Definitely looking back, there are some plays that I think were mistakes in retrospect. I think I should have waited a turn, at least. But yeah, I should have waited 1 turn for Robespierre in retrospect. And I think the way I played H3 was also a little sketchy. At least sort of, you know, taking the Eiffel Tower, but then trying to win militarily. Kind of not a great balance. I probably should have just gone for one or the other. Maybe if I had finished the Eiffel Tower earlier and just focused more on a peaceful victory, I still could have had a chance. But it probably, instead of doing that, I should have went more all in the military and skipped the Eiffel Tower. Those 13 rocks I spent on it probably could have been better put. I mean, it's hard to say, though. Like, the way that my civilization ended, I didn't really have that much more. I mean, I could really wreck things, you know, to put 3 more. Because I spent 13. I mean, I spent 13 on the Eiffel Tower, but that still wouldn't have been enough even to get 1 more army going. But maybe I could have, like, taken different yellow cards or whatever. I would have to really go back and look for sure. So maybe this ended up working out after all. But, yeah, I mean, but, like, destroying 3 more buildings, I mean, would have made impacts a lot worse even. Though, I mean, it would have been a lot more culture I got from the war, though. Yeah, I don't know. I think my play in H3 was a little sketchy. That being said, I am pretty proud of myself for, playing to my out of war. Again, maybe I could have won peacefully, but I kind of doubt it. I think I almost certainly needed that war to win, and I played Age 3 with that attitude in mind. You know, I took, like I said, I took corruption that 1 turn just to make sure I got draws. I put a pretty heavy bid into that strategic territory to give me more draws to a war. And definitely getting that shock troops along with the war was fortunate. That's undeniable. I mean, if it weren't for shock troops, it would have been on classic army instead, right? So that would have been 6 less. Okay, so I guess if I had classic army instead, I would have still just barely won against Fat Hope, but still, like, obviously getting the shock troops, unless I'm missing something. But yeah, still getting the shock troops, definitely highly fortunate. What was I saying? Sorry. But yeah, overall, I think, you know, playing Age 3 to my war outs, I'll confess that going heavy into military is still something that I'm not too experienced in, and it kind of goes against my instincts, I think, because it feels really draw dependent. So if like you don't draw a war in the first 2 turns, it just feels to me really risky to go all in on war, because I've definitely had multiple games where I did not draw any wars at Age 3. That being said, though, I think I probably accurately recognized that a war was the only way I could win this game, so I played as if I would draw a war, because I needed to draw a war to win, and I ended up doing so. So I think in that sense, I probably played this game better than I played the previous 4-player game, because I think I noticed at least less obvious mistakes compared to the previous 4-player game I just went over, even though I did definitely notice some mistakes. Anyway, though, a bit of a janky game, like I said, but and if one of my opponents, I guess probably Sazmar, based on how Sazmar played the last turn, so I probably have Sazmar to thank for that impact of science that won me the game, but regardless, that was highly fortunate that was in the deck. But I mean, that's kind of also how 4-player works, right? Like, there's a lot more impacts are seeded, people seed impacts for their own reasons, so having a balanced civilization that lets you win that lets you take advantage of as many impacts as possible can really make up for, in my case, like, you know, having not much cultural production until the very end, and Fat Hope, like, having this H3 window that I didn't. Very interesting game, I would say, overall. I'm curious to hear what you all think. But first, let's take a look at the standings. So here we can see the live standings of my group. Unfortunately, I am the sloth in my group, so my opponents have already finished the 3-player game between them. But the results of that 3-player game are pretty favorable for me. Fat Hope, who had finished second in both the 4-player games, also finished second in that game, with Sazmar finishing first, meaning that Fat Hope, who had been the closest to me in points after the 4-player games, being not winning is a kind of a bit farther away from me now, relatively speaking, with Sazmar being a bit closer, but I would still obviously prefer them to both be lower than for one of them to be higher, because my goal is to finish first. And so right now, having finished 1 less game than them, while being 4 points of my next competition, you know, that impact of science obviously is a pretty big swing. Were it not for that impact of science, I would be at 9 points, and Fat Hope would be at 11 points. So Fat Hope would have more points than me were it not for that one impact. Obviously, you know, I could still win the group based on the 3- and 2-player games, but it would be a lot closer. Now I have a pretty healthy lead against Fat Hope. I mean, certainly not overwhelming. It is entirely possible for Fat Hope or Sazmar, or even Cleveland, if Cleveland can, you know, make a comeback in the remaining games. There are still 6, yeah, for me at least, there are still 5 games left to play. And anything can happen in those 5 games. So if I don't do well in those 5 games, I will absolutely not finish first. So if I want to maintain this lead, this gives me a little bit of leeway, but not that much leeway. So it's really important for me to still do as best as I can in the remaining games. The 3-player games I'm in, you can see, are pretty close to being finished. At least some of them are. So I should be able to get another video out in this group pretty soon, probably in the next few days. Until then, though, I am, as I was last year and still am, I'm still looking to improve a lot, both in making videos and in my Through the Ages play. So if you have any comments or constructive criticism on either my gameplay or my video making, please do let me know either here or on Discord. I'm Kogito on the Discord. You can find me on the server, on the Through the Ages server. So feel free to DM me if you want to chat too. But regardless, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.